The first time the European Union graduated from sanctions against individuals to sanctions against vast swathes of Russia's economy. This, of course, in response to the outrage over the downing of that passenger plane over pro-separatist eastern Ukraine and over the fighting more generally inside of Ukraine. With us to talk about it from Dick Feinstein in Germany, Rebecca Harms, co-chair of the Greens voting bloc in the European Parliament. We want to welcome back as well Wilfried Bolewski, a former German ambassador, head of protocol, who teaches at the American Graduate School. Edouard Tetreau of the European Council on Foreign Relations, and France24 chief foreign editor Robert Parsons. And again, the story breaking this Tuesday, but it had been planned for several days, stepped up sanctions out of Brussels. Vikram Singh reports.
After months of hesitation, finally an agreement. European leaders in America agreed Tuesday to enforce tougher sanctions against Russia. There are growing concerns in the West that instead of pulling back after the MH17 crash, Russia's involvement in Ukraine will likely intensify.
We and our European partners will take additional measures and impose wider sanctions on key sections of the Russian economy if that is what we must do.
The new European sanctions were discussed at an EU ambassadors' meeting in Brussels today. They will likely include capital market restrictions for Russian state-owned banks, an embargo on future arms sales, and restrictions on technology transfers for Russian energy firms. European leaders have been wary of imposing sanctions given the EU's strong economic links with Russia. But the crash of MH17 in territory controlled by pro-Russia rebels has toughened their stance. On Monday, however, Russia's foreign minister dismissed the impact of the sanctions.
We are not happy about the sanctions, nor are the European countries which have imposed them. But I can reassure you, we will overcome the difficulties that will arise in certain parts of our economy. Maybe we will become more self-reliant and more self-confident.
America said it would back any enhanced EU sanctions with new measures of its own. The sanctions are expected to increase pressure on a Russian economy that's already suffering from slow growth and a lack of foreign investment.
Yes, so certainly the downing of MH17 changing the calculus, especially in Germany, where we can show you, for instance, the cover of this week's copy of Der Spiegel, the news magazine. Stop Putin Now, with photos of the victims. When you think back, Rebecca Harms, to the fence sitting that we've seen in Germany, the soul searching, obviously linked to German gas imports. We know the former chancellor works for Gazprom himself. How much of a change has it been since the downing of that plane?
I think the downing of MH17, the killing of nearly 300 people in this flight was mainly leading to a new perception of what's going on in eastern Ukraine. I think especially in the Western European countries, not only Germany, but also France, Spain, Portugal, etc., people understood better how far the escalation has already gone. And therefore, I think the openness also among our citizens has grown to really consider a change of all our economic relations towards Russia. And I think this is very important for the EU to do it together in all the different sectors. The French case is a very special case, but it's also very important for the Ukrainians, because what I observed when I visited the Donbas region last weekend, by chance I was there after the crash. It was not foreseen like this. But what I saw there is that this country, the citizens of Ukraine, they have never ever intended to go to war. They wanted to change their country, but now the citizens, the country, the nation, the army, the Donbas battalion, etc., they are more and more tracked into a war, and this we have to stop.
Wilfried Belewski, your thoughts on how Germany has changed so much in the past week. We heard the finance minister saying we have to put peace before economic interests at this point.
Let's take the headline of the Der Spiegel, since I'm not a spokesman for the German government. Stop Putin now. My answer would be, engage Putin now. There is a need of change of mindset, of engagement, and engagement not by sanctions, but by inducement. Let's remember, beginning of May, we had a whole package, an aid package by the IMF, not being taken up, in the direction of improving the situation within the country. And these problems within Ukraine are still there, and they need to be addressed the earlier the better. They are the causes and the underlying causing of the present situation. It is the dissatisfaction of a part of the population which has to be addressed. The question of federation, the question of autonomy, the question of development. These are the underlying causes that have to be addressed as soon as possible with all the parties, and not the everlasting spiral of sanctions.
But I agree with you on many of those things. Of course, an awful lot has to be done inside Ukraine. There has to be more autonomy. The issue of language has to be addressed properly, and the government appears to be ready to do precisely those things. But on the issue of inducement, remember in 2008, Russia occupied large parts of Georgia. It still occupies large parts of Georgia. There have been considerable efforts in the 6 years since then, to induce better behavior on the part of Russia. The United States wanted to reset its relations with Russia. None of that has worked. Just this year, Russia has invaded Ukraine. It has occupied yet another great swathe of territory in Crimea. How long do you have to go on inducing Russia to behave better when it shows absolutely no sign whatsoever of correcting its behavior?
Wilfried Belewski?
Again, the answer lies in the causal analysis. Why has Russia, in a person of Putin, been so outrageous of late? Crimea, invasion of parts of with his troops in Ukraine.
I've got another question on that score. Why is he not taking Angela Merkel's phone calls anymore?
Again, I'm not a spokesman for the Russian government, neither. But therein lies part of the solution. The closest contact group which exists and which should exist, of those trusting each other. That is Merkel and Putin. Whether they take the phone call today or tomorrow is another problem. The personal chemistry is still there between the two, and much more so than with any other of the major leaders.
Edouard Tetreau, is the personal chemistry still there, or is it something broken now between the Chancellor raised in East Germany and the man who used to be a spy there?
I wished Angela Merkel was a chemist, but she's an engineer in physics, and which is a bit of a different domain. No, more seriously, let's step back a little bit. This is now exactly 100 years after the start of World War I, after the defenestration of the Archduke in Sarajevo. The events we are seeing today at the eastern and southern doors of Europe, not only Ukraine, but also Gaza, etc., are far worse than what happened a century ago. And now we have a problem with Europe's path to peace, as you mentioned, or making sure to avoid conflicts building up. And you mentioned the core relationship between Germany and Russia, and indeed, when Mr. Putin and Mrs. Merkel meet, they speak either in German or in Russian. The former KGB spy, Mr. Putin, is speaking in Russian to the former person who was spied upon during decades. Right. Now we have a situation with Germany. Is Germany serious about building up what it takes in terms of having Europe building its own defense capability in the dangerous world of the 21st century? One number only. Germany has built, as of today, a 200 billion euro surplus in its balance of payments today. I hear from my friends in Berlin that no, it is still not the moment to get serious on the world stage in terms of diplomacy and defense. Die Sicherheit Die Sicherheit is for the others, is for the Americans. I think we have passed that moment. I think that Germany ought to present to the European Union a project that is different than being the biggest canton in Switzerland, like Europe, that wants to do business with all the world, but that will not take its responsibilities vis-à-vis defense and diplomacy. It's not good enough, it's not serious enough to work the phones in Russian with Mr. Putin.
But hang on a second,
point,
Edouard Tetreau, we're talking about Germany has 350,000 jobs that rely on trade with Russia, an $80 billion in trade in 2013. The stakes are high for Germany.
Yes, but then are the stakes that high so as to let, you know, Mr. Strelkov, who is running the separatists, pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine, was provided with Russian missiles to shoot down a commercial airliner with 200 Europeans inside. And aren't the stakes high enough today to act? I think it is time for Germany to come back to a level high enough of diplomatic responsibility. We need a stronger German voice, also a stronger German financing of a European defense project if we are serious about maintaining a European Union and power in the 21st century.
Rebecca Harms,
we let the calls being made by Washington DC or Beijing or whatever. Now, is Germany serious about its European project? Does it go beyond being a big Switzerland doing business with the rest
Rebecca
of the world?
Harms, do you agree?
Yes, and I don't agree with this discussion right now. I was the first who proposed in Brussels that the French Mistral problem should be solved by taking it to NATO, because NATO anyway is now discussing about the need for more investment in a new armament. And I think it would be better not to arm Russia, but keep the things we produced with us instead of going for the new spiral of armament. On Germany, so I'm really astonished about this demand by a French participant in this round. Because if the European Union right now is not ready to work with economic sanctions instead of military actions in the east of Europe, why then you come now with this proposition of armament of German army and better investments there? I think it's a little bit crazy in this situation, because as far as I understand the situation, France so far has been ready to arm Russia. UK, as a Budapest party, was even also ready to arm Russia, but nobody so far was discussing about military solutions. And I can only warn against this. I think we should be ready, and this is the role of Germany, and there you are right. We should be ready to prepare in solidarity, in common in Europe, our economic sanctions as instruments to get impact on President Putin and his political and economic environment in Russia, and to bring him back to the table and to prepare a good solution for Ukraine.
Edouard Tetreau, the idea is not necessarily to have an arms race inside of Europe, says Rebecca Harms.
No, but we must confront the reality that the rest of the world is doing this arms race, that there is one region in the world that is not only doing nothing but trimming down on its defense expenditures, whereas Mr. Putin's defense expenditures are to triple in the next 12 years. This is a public figure, and something needs to be done about that. And I think the idea is, let's work the phones and discuss economic sanctions, and at the end of the day pay lip service to that and do nothing. You need to be taken seriously by the Russians, by Mr. Putin's Russia, and I can think of no other way but to start better late than never, to start indeed rewriting a European defense project for which Germany should take a form of leadership.
A European defense project. A lot of reactions, by the way, still coming in. One from Leila, who says, yes, we need more sanctions and kick Russia out of the G20 summit. That'll be in 4 months. And charge Putin with crimes against humanity. I know the Deputy Prime Minister of Britain wants Russia stripped of the 2018 World Cup. But the UK, speaking of the military, the UK has started military exercises in Poland. What is it, more than 1,300 troops going for those exercises. Is that posturing? And is there a plan? And is it all a little bit dangerous to be marching around at this particular point in time?
Well, you know, I think there is a plan to a degree. It is posturing as well. But I think it's also a question of something of what Edouard was just saying now. The EU needs to step up and be counted. It has to be taken seriously by the Russian government. And for the last 6 years, I think, since the occupation of parts of Georgia, I don't think the EU has been taken seriously by Russia at all. The point of the sanctions, I think, is to make sure that the European Union is taken seriously by Russia. I'm not sure that the sanctions in themselves will achieve what we're hoping that they will achieve, that the Russians will withdraw from Ukraine. I think it's quite unlikely. The problem, I think, at the moment is that President Putin has backed himself into a corner with his own population, which is very difficult for him to extricate himself from. But as a gesture, as a statement of where the European Union stands, I think the sanctions are essential.
Angela Merkel speaking in the last few minutes saying that those sanctions are unavoidable and now up to Russia to make the decision whether or not to de-escalate. Let me ask you, Rebecca Harms, we've talked about sanctions on the financial sector. We've talked about sanctions on the armament sector. There's also the energy sector. And in this regards, what do you think about the fact that if you're weaning yourself off of Russian gas, and it's a question we've brought up a lot over the past 6 months, what is the alternative? We've seen, for instance, this week, the UK approved drilling for fracking on their territory. Is there a plan for energy that helps to lessen the dependency on Russia?
I think there is a plan. We could have been much better in preparing a sustainable approach to European Energy Union. So I think you know I'm very much opposing the fracking of shale gas. So on this energy union, how we manage, how we prepare European Union to a possible situation being without a ration gas supply next winter, this is still a question beyond fracking or not fracking. I have seen, for example, that in Japan after Fukushima, the whole country was able to save energy to a tremendous amount. And I think in the EU, if we stand together, if we cooperate with the United States, with Norway, with also Northern African countries who have already offered, then we will manage. The very important thing right now is to give a signal in common and to not play the card that some of the EU countries might get cheap off the sanctions and what they mean for the different countries. So financial sector, energy sector, arms export, it's about all the fields, and the European will manage together.
Do you agree, Wilfried Brylewski, that it's possible to wean yourself off Russian gas?
Since the sanctions will not change the political behavior of Putin, as we have seen and other examples have shown, we are still maneuvering ourselves into the corner of a dead end. What is necessary is a change of mindset and a different approach to the underlying causes of this conflict. We're too much looking into our own thinking. We're not observing the other, Putin, and we're not asking ourselves enough what is in his mind.
We're not asking ourselves what it is in his mind. Rob Parsons, let me ask you about this, because I've seen everything this week, from he's a master strategist to he's erratic.
Look, you know, I don't think it's our role to play the psychiatrist with President Putin. You know, we've seen what's happened. We've got facts on the ground. We've seen that he's occupied Ukraine. We've seen he's occupied part of Georgia. He's not responding.
And he's got public opinion at home that supports him.
And he's whipping up public at home to support him. And he's flooding eastern Ukraine with weapons. What more evidence do we need that something more positive than psychiatry is required to deal with Putin?
Yes. I fully agree with that, and I think that there is one word we have not pronounced yet, which is transatlantic, and transatlantic relationship and partnership. Today, Europe cannot go on its own facing retaliation, which will happen, notably on the energy front, on financial services. There will be economic retaliation from Russia. We need to have our American friends fully on board with us here. We need Wall Street to back up whatever sanctions the City of London will take against for the freezing of financial assets of Mr. Putin's circle of friends. We also need our American friends to back up any possible retaliation from Mr. Putin's Gazprom interest. We need our American friends to be on board. That's one thing. The other very important thing that we need to do, and we still have 4 weeks before that, is Europe needs to be serious about its high diplomacy. And you have seen the very silly horse trading that has been made as of today around the selecting European commissioners, by default, high rep, what comes up. We at the European Council on Foreign Relations, we have just pushed a petition asking for a really senior figure to take this job of high rep for diplomacy in Europe, because this is now a serious moment for the European diplomacy to have a unified front vis-à-vis this situation.
Rebecca Harms, listening to Edouard Tetreau, it sounds like Europe doesn't have high street credibility with Russia.
So I think we made a big mistake that so far we discussed again and again in Brussels the sanctions, but then in the end the states, the leaders of the European states and governments did not decide adequate to their evaluation of the situation. I hope this will change now, and I'm convinced if the European political leaders stand together, unified in this conflict, then based on the economic changes we discussed towards Russia, Russia will change. We don't know how long it will take, but I'm convinced, and I completely disagree with thinking about feelings of Mr. Putin and people close to him, because what I observed is that Mr. Putin decided to isolate his country, that Mr. Putin and his political friends decided to break international rules and treaties, and now it's still up to him to come back to negotiations and to give up this way, which means very, very difficult times also for Russia.
And do you agree with Edouard Tetreau that there should be tighter coordination still between Washington and Europe?
So, yes, obviously it's necessary, but I also agreed with what Mr. Obama said when he visited some months ago Europe for the first time this year. He came to Brussels, and he made very clear, crystal clear, that this problem is more a problem which should be solved by the Europeans themselves. The United States are ready to assist and to help. They could do it maybe also with their oil reserve. This has to be discussed. But I agree that the Europeans have to become serious about their own values, about also their promise to protect the self-determinance of Ukraine. Don't forget, we signed the association agreement only a few weeks ago.
All right, so Europe has to stand by its commitments. Rebecca Harms, I want to thank you for joining us. I also want to thank Edouard Tetreau, Wilfried Berlewski, and Robert Parsons. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
The Observer's Direct.